with a compelling perspective on global politics. This is the Patrick Henningsen Show on TNT Radio.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. I am going to welcome onto the stage very shortly a fantastic independent journalist who's also a State Department correspondent in Washington, D.C. Sam Husseini is going to be joining us shortly. Great segment before the break by Basil Valentine. We're still trying to connect our Middle Eastern journalist from Yemen, Yusuf Mari. He's on the line, so kind of difficult to catch. We're still working on it behind the scenes. We've got our people chasing him down, but connections with Yemen difficult sometimes. I know there's power outage issues. Networks have gone down there before when we've done calls, so it's always a challenge to connect people in some of these regions, especially in war zones, but we're going to continue to try to do that. In the meantime, we will be connecting Sam Husseini very shortly to get the latest on some of these big stories. We've also got some absolutely jaw-dropping clips. I want to get Sam's reaction on absolutely incredible developments there. But what Basil was talking about was, how is this issue in the Middle East going to move the dial politically? And the sad part about it is, and as we said, this is the whole point, because there's no difference between the two major two-party duopolies in the U.S. and the U.K., while people might sit out in protest and not vote for Biden or not vote for Keir Starmer and the Labour Party in the UK general election in the fall, that's only going to keep, in Britain's case, it's going to keep the Conservatives in power. So you get a status quo on policy, ironically. And then in the United States, it means that you may get a Republican administration and a Trump administration, which, let's face it, based on the rhetoric from Donald Trump with regards to Israel, he's pretty much in the tank for the Israelis and everything they're doing in Gaza. We did hear somewhat more dissenting speech from Trump earlier on, but looks like the lobby and some of the big donors have gotten to him and got him back on track. So there's not a lot of daylight really between Biden and Trump on policy. Total support, total uncategorical support for Israel militarily, financially, politically, everything else. You look at what they tried to ram through the House just last week, this anti-Semitism bill. What a monstrosity from a constitutional point of view in America, but it really goes to show you how powerful this foreign lobby is in the United States to push a bill through that would compel speech, protected First Amendment speech, how a foreign government can actually achieve that pretty much by just paying off everybody in Congress and the Senate. Everybody's on the payroll from this lobby. So this is how you get legislation like this. This is legislation that would not basically pass muster in any real serious legal challenge. But the problem is when these things are, if they're passed, they will eventually get tested in the courts, but that whole process can take, 1 to 2 years. In the meantime, how much damage is done in the interim? And that's always the problem. Luckily, they have a little more of an expedient process here in the United States because there's a written Bill of Rights. So that's the sort of the standard, the threshold, the bar is very high. In Britain, there is no written constitution. And without getting too much into the weeds on the debate of the British Constitution, the merits and the problems with it, that it could become precedent law. But again, how long does that? Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. We're in hour number 2, this live broadcast. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. Pleased to have you with us. And hello to everybody in the TNT chat community. Great to see some of the usual suspects in there. I see some familiar faces. Keeping it real and keeping the memes, keeping the opposition research, all the things that our community does in there. Absolutely a wealth of knowledge. That's where you want to hang out during the show. Just go to tntradio.live, lower right-hand corner. There's a red bubble on the screen. That's where you log into the chat community. You can also access that via the TNT app, which you can download on Google Play and also on the Apple Store as well. And just go to the menu and you'll see the chat community. It'll bring you right over there to a web browser where you can log in and stay logged in Monday to Friday, especially during this program. Great to see everybody there. I want to welcome onto the program right now an independent journalist based in Washington, D.C. He's also a correspondent at the U.S. State Department. He is basically very much involved in the conversation on so many aspects of this, what's going on right now, politically, as the United States relates to the issue in the Middle East, what's happening right now on the ground in Gaza as well. There's a lot of developments with the U.S. student protests, which have been mushrooming all over the United States, now in Europe. So this is a really interesting time right now. Sam Husseini on to the stage right now. Sam, how are you?
Great to be with you. Thank you. I'm good, Patrick.
Sam, a lot has happened since we've last spoken, and this is going in so many different directions, and there's a lot of misdirection going on right now. This has been a very convenient distraction, the student uproar and all the sort of efforts to shut these protests down. Then there's this insane anti-Semitism bill that's being pushed through Congress. So I just want to get your thoughts of where things are at. How are you making sense of all this happening right now?
Yeah, it's, the whole student thing started when the president of Colombia was compelled to testify before Congress. And that triggered the protests. And I think in some ways the protests have been remarkable, a lot of them, and in some ways, in spite of the efforts of some of the people involved in them, it has been something of a distraction. Although, I mean, if you go to the protests, like at GW, I've spent a fair amount of time at GW, where you have a whole bunch of different colleges and universities convening there. They have a placard with their rules of engagement and so on, and in big block letters is keep the focus on Gaza. So that is a mantra of the movement that you have here, and it's gratifying to see the movement. I'm getting the sense, though, that the movement there is starting to veer to take its gaze off of campus and onto major institutions. And I think that the next target might be the United Nations, with all of the activity in New York and with the shutting down of the encampment at Columbia. You saw them go to the Met Gala, for what that's worth. This sort of grotesque perversion of art, from what I can tell. But you have the UN, and the UN has been in limbo, basically, because you had the whole genocide convention thing at the International Court of Justice, which I followed very closely. But that was supposed to lead to what's called Uniting for Peace resolution at the General Assembly, where the General Assembly basically says to the Security Council, you failed to do your job. You're not keeping security. The U.S. has repeatedly vetoed moves at the Security Council. So there needs to be a serious demand made of the UN to fulfill its alleged proper role, and to start overcoming the U.S. veto, so that you could see an intersection of those two developments: the student protests in New York, as well as what could be happening at the United Nations. And you're absolutely right about the so-called anti-Semitism legislation, totally conflating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. It's actually based on a executive order that Trump had passed during his presidency, and now you're seeing the true face of insidious bipartisanship, with the Biden Democrats joining with the Trump Republicans to ram this through, I think, with less than 100 dissenters, I believe. So it's basically yet another assault on the First Amendment, just as the going after TikTok, because it wasn't suppressing speech critical of Israel sufficiently. And you basically had Mitt Romney and Anthony Blinken admit that that's why TikTok was targeted recently. So I mean, you're right. And of course, the big enchilada is that you have and what we should be keeping our eye on is Israel's escalation, continued attacks and escalation against Gaza, sealing, totally taking control of the Rafah crossing, which seems to be a contravention of the much heralded Camp David agreement. And the Biden administration pretending that it's trying to mediate a peace here. I don't buy it. I don't see any reason to buy it. Certainly, in terms of substance, the U.S. has not changed anything. It's unclear to me if the Israeli-U.S. posture is trying to come to some kind of agreement to basically get the Israeli captives out so that they could then continue the slaughter, or if they just want to hinder any kind of agreement and just continue with their escalations against the Palestinian society in Gaza.
Isn't this a potentially dangerous situation right now at Rafah because you have the Egyptian military in very close proximity with the Israeli forces there, and there's always been this kind of safe distance or separation there, and now you have a potentially inflammatory situation where you have potentially hundreds of thousands of Palestinians being told or threatened by Israel they need to evacuate, need to be pushed out of the area. This is the very area, Sam, that they told them to go to as a safe zone when Israel was flattening northern Gaza, carpet bombing it. So, I mean, where is this headed? Is this just really another ethnic cleansing play by the Israelis? A cynical ploy, yet another one?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's been a whole series of internal ethnic cleansings, displacements inside of Gaza, with the net effect of sort of atomizing the Palestinian people. I mean, each of these is illegal. You're not allowed to treat civilians like this. If you have something like this and you're the occupying power, you're supposed to go after anything that's causing, damage or attacks and so on. You're allowed to do police actions. You're not allowed to do this as an occupying power under the Geneva Conventions. But the U.S. doesn't recognize the applicability of the Geneva Conventions to Israel. So they have laid the legal groundwork for Israel to be in brazen violation of international law here. And that's where we're seeing that it's basically they've made Gaza a free fire zone where they can kill at will. And the U.S. hinders any meaningful accountability for that.
We've also seen reports. I want to get your comment on this. You've probably seen this. Axios was the first person to push out this report in the last 48 hours that the United States was going to basically restrict armaments shipments to Israel. Now, I've been looking into this, trying to find out what the provenance of this is or to get some confirmation. I'm seeing a lot of noise in the media, but I can't see in a concrete way, Sam, where this is going to actually happen. But it seems like this story, nonetheless, has been pushed out I think for a reason. Are we looking at, is this a kind of political story that's designed to, I don't know, create some padding on this issue? Because what are the practical, aspects of that it's not realistic, isn't it? Stopping arms to Israel?
Yeah, no, I think what's going on there, and I can't be certain because like you, I couldn't figure out the exact provenance of that story. I mean, the mode right now, and it's going to change. The mode right now is that the Biden administration is attempting to posture as if it's a meaningful mediator between Israel and Hamas, along with Egypt and Qatar. And so, putting that story out there in a favored outlet like Axios, helps create that illusion. And I think that's probably what's going on there. A lot of the rhetoric that you're seeing, from the administration has been somewhat more moderate in the last couple of days. You had the King of Jordan visiting Biden. You had all of these things that seemed to constrain the U.S. in some way, but it very much seems like short-term posturing for either one of the scenarios that I pointed out before, either to try to get the captives out so that then Israel can escalate again, or to pretend that they went through this process, and then people would believe them when they say, "Oh no, the Hamas deal is phony," and Israel, has put forward a reasonable plan for going in there, once again displacing the Palestinians, and currently in Rafah, and continuing with the mayhem. Another aspect of this, by the way, I should say, is that even people who are critical of Israel continuously say they have nowhere to go, and that's not true. They do have somewhere to go. Under international law, those Palestinians can and should be able to go to their rightful homes in what is now Israel. You even had right-wing Israeli ministers address this a couple of months ago. They said any women and children coming towards the Israeli border will be immediately shot. The Israelis have actually, thought this possibility out, that the Palestinians might actually say, "You're shoving us around all around Gaza. Well, we're just going to, try to cross the border." Israel has made clear that they will mow them down, even though it's their legal right to go back to their original homes.
Yeah, and that's a big source of all the problems here. The fact that they precluded any such option in terms of the right to return to the occupied territories. This is just going to continue to be a problem going forward. Israel's certainly not going to budge on this, but even then, Sam, we have the political will in Washington. Is there any political will in Washington? Is there any daylight between the Democrats and the Republicans? Had a few more dissenting Republicans on the arms finance bill for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, maybe a dozen or so. Absolutely no dissenters on the Democrat side on that. But in terms of getting a resolution on here, do you see anything happening before November? Because nobody wants to deal with it. Nobody wants to be seen as the one who doesn't support Israel. There's a lot of pressure on Biden now in the media. They're saying Biden's not supporting Israel enough, and that he is not giving Israel what it needs. And then Trump is, and the Republicans are using this to say, but if you vote for us, we'll make sure Israel has everything it needs to defeat Hamas, etc. This is the sort of death spiral dance that we're stuck in right now up to November. How are you reading this?
Yeah, that's the nature of the duopoly, that they work hand in glove to accelerate U.S. militarism and its threats to its quote unquote civilizational rivals. Islam using Israel, Orthodoxy using Ukraine, and Taiwan, China using Taiwan, and that's the posture of the duopoly. In the case of Gaza, you're seeing some noises finally among some Democrats, Sanders and the Squad, and so on. You're seeing them, say some reasonable things that they weren't saying several months ago. So I guess there's some movement there, and you're saying Massey, company putting out some, some level of dissent on the anti-Semitism bill, for example, and other, related things, the surveillance stuff that they recently passed as well. But it's really minimal, and it again highlights, my critique of the duopoly. That's what's needed is some kind of a programmatic unification along the lines of my Vote Pact project, for the left, and principled progressives and conscientious conservatives joining together against the establishment duopoly. As long as they remain fixated on the partisanship, you continue to get the worst version of both parties because they view their voters as serfs. It is your job to vote for Biden because Trump is worse. And then to the other side, it is your job to vote for Trump because Biden is worse. And vote. So the public effectively becomes disempowered because of this dynamic, and people have to break out of it, I would argue, in pairs.
And to make things even more tricky on this issue, Sam, we have this sort of injection by the Speaker of the House, who is, should be a little more, I would say, objective on the matter, is really kind of embracing the Christian Zionist religious ideology here. I've got a clip from Speaker Mike Johnson, who's got quite a few critics now, especially in the recent weeks. But let's go ahead and listen to this. I want to get your comments on what he is saying here, and how significant you think an address like this is at a Holocaust remembrance event just this week. Let's go ahead and roll this. Mike Johnson.
German universities like those at Strasbourg were at the heart of Renaissance and intellectual life. But it was at those same elite centers of learning where Jewish faculty and students were suddenly expelled, where anti-Jewish courses were introduced, and where professors performed horrific pseudoscience experiments on Jewish people brought from nearby concentration camps. We remember what happened then, and now today, we are witnessing American universities quickly becoming hostile places for Jewish students and faculty. The very campuses which were once the envy of the International Academy have succumbed to an anti-Semitic virus. Students who were known for producing academic papers are now known for stabbing their Jewish peers in the eyes with Palestinian flags. And with our survivors before us, if you close your eyes in the quietness of your own heart, you can almost hear the glass of Jewish storefronts shattered by stormtroopers. You could see fathers being executed at point blank in the ghettos. You can feel a brother's hand slipping out of his sister's as men in uniforms separate them into lines, and they can only mouth to one another, "Everything will be okay," hoping that it would be. You can hear screams coming from the gas chambers. And it's in these troubling times we must look to this audience, to the survivors of the Holocaust and their descendants, to help us remember and to bear witness. Several weeks ago, I am very proud to report to you that the United States Congress overwhelmingly passed security assistance to Israel to help protect its borders. That's right.
Let's come back. Sam Husseini, I mean, he's invoked the crystal knock there, saying that the Columbia approach is like the crystal knock. He's the gas chambers, stabbing in the eye. That didn't actually happen. That was debunked. But even if something's debunked, it doesn't stop our politicians from repeating it. Who wrote that speech? I don't think he wrote that speech, but he sure delivered it with quite a lot of passion. Sam, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, part of the dynamic here is, every accusation is an admission, and at some level, I mean, you now have a massive repression of freedom of speech at universities across the United States, and I'm sure increasingly in Europe. I mean, Germany, even before any recent protests, has been stifling speech in the name of combating anti-Semitism, and again, the same conflation of anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. I mean, that really was even more deranged than Biden's remarks. I mean, the whole, you can hear the screams and you can hear the shattered glass and so on. It's such a level of delusion and invoking of history in a way that doesn't clarify the present, but seeks to pervert it so that people can't see the atrocities before their own eyes because they're programmed into looking or pretending to look at past atrocities. And then you had Biden, invoke the slaughtered babies and rapes in his remarks, I think, at the same event, and talking about how Hamas is out to, eliminate all Jews from the face of the earth. Another big lie. The Hamas charter does not say that. It says we fight Zionists because of the colonial enterprise. We do not fight Jews because they're Jews. So it's just, more and more lies. And, these lies are part of the genocidal intent, right? Because you propagandize people to keep the slaughter going. In a sense, the lies elucidate what's actually going on, because they show that these leaders are effectively laying the groundwork for continued maiming and mayhem.
And the other thing that, they say that just because students in America exercising their First Amendment rights are supporting an anti-war initiative, effectively, this is what this is. It just happens to be centered around the Palestinian issue. Could be in any other issue, could be Iraq, could be Libya, could be something else, happens to be Palestinian. Ergo, this is now hostile to Jewish students. I mean, it's complete, as they say in Britain, complete Boulder Dash. But it's just risen to the level of this kind of mainstream accepted talking point, Sam, and they're not letting go of it. And that it is kind of disturbing, because people are staking, institutions, politicians, media, they're staking their reputations on this. What do you think?
Well, I mean, sort of. I mean, first of all, it is complete. Just call it Boulder Dash is almost a compliment to it. I mean, I spent a fair amount of time over the last week and more at the protests at GW. They have, Jewish prayers. There are a ton of Jewish students there. They have Muslim prayers. They had an Orthodox Easter service the other day. They have really embraced coming together. Religious fealty from different groups, including Jewish students. So the whole thing is complete bunk. My concern with, that they're staking their reputations, my problem with that is that the system keeps going from disaster to disaster, and virtually no one is held accountable, from Iraq WMDs to COVID origins to what's going on here. Because of the continued power of the mainstream media structures and big tech suppressing certain speech, and the power of the false choices given by the duopoly. Between those several filters, it has so far, and I hope it's changing, but so far it has prevented a meaningful reckoning that's long overdue for these people of the establishment. And it really is like, with Mike Johnson, just to go back to him, they're working hand in glove. I mean, he owes his speakership to Jeffries, to the establishment Democrats. They are colluding both in terms of their program of going after these so-called rivals, as well as the process in terms of him maintaining his speakership so that they can ram stuff through, all the while pretending to be opposed to each other. They're pretending to be opposed to each other, but they are on the same page on so many critical issues, certainly in terms of, perpetual war and subjugation of First Amendment rights.
Yeah, another reason to get behind Sam Husseini's Vote Pact initiative, votepact.org. Follow Sam on X Twitter. Just to illustrate the point that you're making from New York, Sam, I've got a clip here. There's a lot of Jewish supporters of Palestine, a lot of them, and a lot of students, also a lot of older people. And this scene just pretty much says it all. This is a Zionist Jewish hysterical woman in New York fighting with a Orthodox Jewish man who supports Palestine right in the middle of the road. Go ahead and roll this clip. This is quite extraordinary.
Hey! Who's it? This is mine.
This is mine.
Step back.
Don't touch it. Don't touch it.
Hey.
Arrest her! Arrest her! Arrest her!
Okay, you're in trouble for
Arrest her! Officer, arrest her!
reporting you to
No,
DSS.
why do you not arrest?
So there's this just maniacal look on this woman's face. These Orthodox New York Jews with the Palestinian flag supporting the Palestinian cause, and this woman just went absolutely haywire. She couldn't handle it, and you could just see it in her eyes. She wasn't trying to take the flag from Arabs. She's taking it from Orthodox Jews. I mean, Sam, incredible. But that kind of says it all, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. And you know, just the assaults at peaceful protesters on campus have been so manyfold, directly from the administrations and the police. In DC, they haven't cleared out the encampment because the police won't do it. The administration wanted them to do it, and the police said that they were concerned about the optics of it. You've had in UCLA, they used, I haven't been able to confirm if it's rubber bullets or rubber coated metal bullets at students. They had these, they're almost paramilitary counter protesters, pro-Israeli counter protesters, firing fireworks into the encampments at UCLA. You had snipers on the roofs in Indiana. As well as, you know, like stormtroopers at Columbia and elsewhere, you know, clearing off things. So, you know, there's all of these repressive things being taken, sometimes by the police or so-called security forces, and sometimes by individuals, all in an effort to, you know, squelch these protests. And I think, you know, articulate Jewish protesters are particularly aggravating to these people. Because they can't dismiss them with a, you know, typical, you know, anti-Semitism smear. So they want to intimidate them in some other way.
So potential positive here, Sam, is that the First Amendment has now come to the forefront for what you could say is the political left in the United States, exposing this issue to especially students and seeing how important this issue is. And this is, I think, civil liberties, the First Amendment. These were traditionally stronghold issues for the political left in the U.S. and now could return to that. I think this is a very positive thing that could come out of this. What do you think?
It could. I hope that the political left takes it to heart and makes it a principled thing. So not just because it may seem convenient in this moment. And I hope that people on the so-called right re-examine where they are. You know, they've been calling everybody who, you know, has identity politics and wants to suppress speech as snowflakes and so on. And suddenly when it's done in the name of Zionism, suddenly so many people on the right rally around it, you know, showing that they've been hypocrites all these years. So they need to either totally re-examine themselves or be dismissed as the political charlatans that they are.
Yeah, this is the new phenomenon known as the woke right, which has been dubbed and quite rightly in the last couple of weeks. So yeah, where's the consistency on this? I always thought that conservatives always champion the Constitution. Sam, this is their sort of wheelhouse, to be more constitutional and to respect the Constitution. They want to put Supreme Court justices in that are originalists and will defend that Bill of Rights. But when it comes to this issue, a total reverse, a total U-turn on this. It's been quite shocking, especially to see the TV punditry like Mark Levine, who has a whole constitutional program on Fox. He's saying the students need to be booted out, shut down. Alan Dershowitz, the constitutional law professor at Harvard, is saying that any university that divests from Israel should have their federal funding removed. I quote Alan Dershowitz. He tweeted it today.
Yeah, it's incredible. And, you know, the president of Columbia was met with similar threats from members of Congress when she testified that, you know, that she had to go after the encampment or they would go after the funding of Columbia. That actually came out of some members of Congress as well. And one more thing on the, you know, spending time at George Washington University, they have a statue there of George Washington, and, you know, with the back and forth with the flag defenders there and so on. It really made me ruminate about, in terms of George Washington's farewell address was, exactly on this point. He warned against a passionate attachment to a foreign power and all of the evils that would flow from that. And at the time, he was referring to how different factions in the United States, some favored France, some favored Britain, but it applies in spades to Israel. And it's actually the title of a book by George Ball, who was the main dissenter in the Johnson administration against the Vietnam War. He wrote a book entitled The Passionate Attachment about the U.S.-Israeli relationship since the founding of the State of Israel. So, all of these people who are pretending to be constitutionalists and pretending to stand for the flag and for America first and all of this have to genuinely re-examine. That's a subject of my latest piece.
Yeah, Sam Husseini, follow him on Substack as well. Follow Sam's writings there. We've dropped your Twitter, your ex Twitter account there that's on the lower third. We'll put that in the TNT chat community as well, folks. If you want to stay up to breast on what's happening on issues like this, follow Sam Husseini. Sam, thank you for joining us on TNT this week.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you, Patrick.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen, Sam Husseini. Look, we'll take a break right here. We're going to connect on the other side. I'm Patrick Henningsen. Stay with us. We'll be back in a few.